The Committee on Municipal Oversight and Elections is called to order. The Secretary will please call the roll.
Representative Aguilar?
Here.
Representative De Los Santos?
Here.
Representative Harris?
Happy to be here.
Representative Heath?
Here.
Representative Hernandez?
Present.
Representative Jones?
Present.
Representative Smith?
Present.
Representative Turek?
Present.
Vice Chairman Culloden?
Present.
Chairman Parker?
Here. Okay, with that, it's been requested that we have a 5-minute recess, and then we will hear the next bill, which is 2560 next. It should be a hot one, so go get a drink. Thank you. But without objection, we're going to get started, and the Mo committee will be called back into order. Okay, go ahead, staff, if you will explain HB2560.
Madam Chair and members, House Bill 2560 requires the county recorder to provide and the Secretary of State to post specified election information, including a list of persons who voted in the election, all ballot images used to tabulate the election results, and the cast vote record. Madam Chair, there is an amendment I can explain.
Please explain the amendment.
Madam Chair and members, the one-page amendment in your name dated February 7th at 8:42 a.m. modifies the definition of cast vote record and states that voters who are protected under the law will be included on the list by total number only. Additionally, the amendment specifies that posted ballot images must be unaltered. With that, I'm available for questions.
Do we have any questions for staff?
Madam
ahead.
Chair, if you would, do you know how many people are on the address protected list statewide?
Madam Chair, Representative Harris, I don't have the exact number, but I can find that information.
If you can, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, Mr. Speaker Toma is the sponsor of the bill, and he's asked Senator Ken Bennett, who's sponsoring a mirror bill in the Senate, to speak on his behalf. So we'll go ahead and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Ken Bennett, representing Legislative District 1. And I served for 6 years as the Secretary of State, and since Rose Mofford passed a few years ago, I think I'm the one that's overseen more elections in the state of Arizona than any other person alive, which puts me in a unique position to try to address something that I think is very important in our society. You know, every day we begin our work pledging our allegiance to the flag and the republic that it represents. And I believe that the most important aspect of being a republic is representing the people who put us in a variety of different positions, and them knowing that the people that are elected and put into the positions that represent them were done so correctly and accurately. And when the voters lose confidence in that process, we teeter on the brink of losing our entire country, our republic. Some call it a democracy, whatever you want to call it, but in my mind, it's our country and it's at risk. Senate Bill 2560 intends to make our elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verified. And it does so by doing 4 things. It says that every time a county conducts an election, it will produce publicly 4 pieces of information, 1 before the election and 3 after, that in my opinion and with the opinion of many others, and I'm very honored to have Secretary of State Fontes here with me today in support of the bill, and many others that I've worked with for years. And even though they are of a different party than me, I don't think this is a partisan issue. We have got to come together somehow as Republicans and Democrats in Arizona to make our elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verifiable. And so the 4 things that this bill will require the counties to do, before the election, produce a list of who is eligible to vote in that election. In Arizona, we cut off voter registration 29 days before an election. So we know for more than 4 weeks before the election who's eligible to vote in the election. And the voter list is really already public information. If you have a few $100s in almost any county and as little as about $600 statewide, you can get the voter list in its entirety already. But this would publish the list of who's eligible to vote in the upcoming election, including inactive voters, who often get overlooked. The other 3 documents that are reported to the public are after the election. And the second of them is a list of who voted. Now, everybody on the who voted list should have been on the eligible to vote list. And between those 2 lists, we can verify that nobody is either registered or voting more than 1 time each. The third document that is, or the third piece of information that is called for in this bill is the release of the ballot images. There should be 1 ballot image, no more, no less, for everyone on the who voted list. And then the fourth document is what's called the cast vote record. And the cast vote record is basically the tabulation spreadsheet. And the ballot images and the cast vote record do not identify a voter in particular. But together, they allow anyone who wants to verify the election to look at the ballot images and the cast vote record and see that the votes were tabulated correctly. The cast vote record essentially works like a spreadsheet. And as you know, a spreadsheet has rows and columns. The rows on the cast vote record correspond with a ballot image. If you have the ballot image and the cast vote record, you don't know who voted any particular ballot or any particular row recorded in the cast vote image or in the cast vote record. But you can look at ballot number 692, and you can go to row 692 in the cast vote record, and you can see that on ballot 692 image, there's a vote for Smith and Jones and Garcia. You can go to the cast record, row 692, and see that votes for Smith and Jones and Garcia were recorded. And then you can add up the columns in the cast vote record and see that Garcia was awarded 12,000 votes, and that's what the county reported to us in the official canvass. Now there's many aspects in the bill to do some very important things. One of them is to protect the identity of any particular voter. I believe in many conversations I've had with many of you that we can probably improve that and do even more as we move this bill through. But we want to make sure that the list of the voters is limited to name, street address, I think is in the bill right now, and precinct. I think birth year is in there just to make sure that we don't have a junior and a senior, John Smith Jr. and Senior at the same address, and somebody think, well, we've got a duplicate voter when in fact they are, one's born in 1940 and the other's born in 1960. But there might be some other ways to make sure that we are not seeing duplicate voters or thinking we're seeing duplicate voters without getting the birth year. We're not trying to do anything in any aspect of this bill to breach the confidentiality of voters, especially as they're tied to any particular ballot. We're not trying to do anything in this bill to allow anyone to reverse engineer anything in the cast vote record back to a particular ballot, and by knowing what precinct it came from and how many ballot styles were used in that precinct, figure out who voted. I've talked with Representative Turek and others about Braille voters. You know, we have a few dozen Braille voters every year. We're not trying to identify anything. So you'll see in the bill aspects of combining small precincts in with larger ones so that nobody can reverse engineer back to the identity of any particular voter and how they voted. If the threshold, I think it's 10 in the bill right now, is too small, then let's work on amendments throughout this process to make this bill even better. It is my belief and my publicly stated goal that I want this bill to earn the support of 2/3 to 3/4 of both caucuses in both the House and the Senate. And if we do that, we have probably done something magic in this country as far as coming together to do something that makes our elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verified, so that people can have confidence that the people who voted were eligible to vote. There's a ballot for everyone who voted, and the tabulation spreadsheet adds up everything correctly, and we're not divulging any confidentiality of how any specific voter voted. As I said, I'm honored to have Secretary Fontes with me. I hope, Madam Chair, you'll call him next, but I will stand for any questions of the members. Thank you.
Excellent. Any member, excuse me, any members for the bill sponsor?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Senator Bennett, I just want to thank you, first of all. We've had many conversations about this, and I appreciate your willingness to have those conversations and to really try and get this in a place where it's the strongest that can possibly be. So I know you and I have talked about this before, but I want to, for everyone, I want to revisit that issue of visually impaired voters and explain my concern there. So with the Braille ballot, that's going to need to be duplicated. And if we're putting both of those into the system and we can see, kind of a duplication, it doesn't matter how large of a bundle we'd be able to put those voters into, we would still be able to find them. So for example, if I had a bundle of 5,000 voters and I have one visually impaired voter and I can see which precinct they're in, then if I happen to see them walking on the street with their guide dog or their walking stick, I would then know how they voted. So we've talked about moving them into the category of protected voters. Are there other people beyond just visually impaired voters who we might be able to identify? This is a bill that my strong preference would have been that we would have had even more time with, because I think it's really important that we're very, very, very thoughtful and very careful about how we're addressing privacy. So are there other categories of voters who you think potentially could fall into that we need to be mindful of moving forward?
Madam Chair, Representative, absolutely. The bill, for example, calls for voters protected as far as judges and police officers and law enforcement and prosecutors. Anybody who is a protected voter right now would have their names not even reported individually or redacted. They would just be done in a group in the voter lists. To put a little bit of numbers to that, and this isn't directly to your question, Representative Harris, but in Maricopa County, out of about 2.6 million registered voters, there's about 4,800, I think, that are protected, identity protected voters. Specifically to the address confidentiality program, which is battered women or spouses or anybody like that, I think it's a few thousand statewide at this point. So out of 4.3 million registered voters statewide, the protected voters is less than probably 8,000 total. And they would be reported as totals. As far as the Braille or blind ballots, Representative Turek, Madam Chair, I can't, the categories of ballots that I've seen as I've administered elections around the state, you've got the Braille ballots, which frankly, it does no good to try to show the Braille ballot itself. Because if you look at a Braille ballot, it's about the size of a cookbook, and it's blank paper as you look directly at it until you feel it and sense that there's some raised holes that are the Braille. So putting an image of a Braille ballot doesn't make sense anyway. And so that needs to be carved out in an amendment yet to be part of the bill, and I would welcome one from you or anyone else to work on that aspect. As I think through the other groups of ballots that are dealt with in an election, you've got large print ballots. I don't think there's any aspect of whether a voter has requested a large print ballot that on its surface would tell somebody that, oh, that's the one or two people in the Maple precinct that gets large print ballots. There's actually not very many large print ballots requested, but if there's a few thousand of them, I don't think they self-identify themselves out on the street when you're walking by with a assist animal or whatever they have. There's provisional ballots that probably need to be thought through very carefully to make sure that anybody who voted provisionally and was determined to be an authentic voter and allowed to vote. We don't want to expose them in any way. But the Braille ballots is the most obvious one that I think needs to be kind of grouped or combined in, maybe with the protected voters, so that we don't have any. We have this number in a in the last election, 2022. I think there were 1.9 million or 2.1 million votes statewide, and we're talking about a few thousand people in all of these various categories. And if they're lumped together in number only, along with the list of voters who is already public information that they're registered voters at certain addresses, then we might have 2.1 million names of voters and 4,000 or 5,000, the number of 4,000 or 5,000 others who are in these protected categories for whatever reasons. And then we have the same number of ballot images, and nothing can be tied to any one person.
Any other questions for the speaker?
Chairwoman, Representative, I have a question.
Yes,
I have a statement and a question. So I'm registered to vote because you sent me a letter when I was 18 years old wishing me happy birthday. So
Thank you.
just to break some ice there. But I'm very curious about this bill because I know you were also part of the Cyber Ninjas audit, and so I'm just kind of curious, how were you guys counting ballots during that audit, and how will this bill make that different?
Madam Chair, Representative, I was not part of the audit. I was asked by the Senate to be the liaison to the audit. So I had no decision-making authority as to how the audit was conducted.
Okay.
But if I had some authority as to how the audit should have been conducted, it would have been to use some of the fundamental aspects of what we have here. And that is, look at the ballot images and make sure that they are all correctly recorded in the cast vote record. Yeah. That probably more than anything else should have given people confidence that, well, and then comparing the number of ballot images. I mean, we looked at 2,089,563 ballots in that election in Maricopa County. The focus of the auditors, they chose to make it to the paper ballots, and it really doesn't matter whether it's, I mean, there should be the same number of paper ballots as there are ballot images that are scanned from those paper ballots as they go through the machine. But we found we were looking for 2,089,563 ballots, and we found 2,089,654 ballots. We found within 900 and some odd total ballots, and we found in the votes for president within 350 votes of what the county had told us a few months earlier.
Yeah.
That fundamental finding got, I think, overshadowed by a lot of other things that kind of came up in the process. And so I think the aspects of what we're trying to do here is what will help most Arizonans know that the people that voted were eligible to vote. There's a ballot image, no more, no less, for the number of people that voted, and the tabulation spreadsheet on which they were added up was done correctly. There's some other things that need to be dealt with in our elections, making sure signature verification is done better, and cleaning up our voter rolls and all kinds of other things. But one of the fundamental things to cleaning up our voter rolls is about 2 weeks or whatever we decide. It says 10 days in this legislation before every election. Just print a list of who's registered to vote. I can go to Yavapai County and in a precinct and look on a particular address, or in a 2150 UN Drive, I should find Kenneth Roy Bennett and Jean Bennett. And if that's what I find, fine. If I find Kenneth Roy and Kenneth R. and Kenny and Ken and Ken Roy, then we got a problem.
Yeah. A follow-up question is, also during the audit, there was concerns that there was a voter information that was taken to the person running the audit. So would you be willing to add some security measures on here to make sure that if this does become a bill, we aren't, people who are being contracted to audit an election are not mishandling our information?
Madam Chair, Representative, absolutely. And in fact, I don't think it's reflected in the form of amendment of an amendment yet, but I would like to see the Class 1 misdemeanor that's in the bill right now risen to a Class 5 felony for anybody who tries to alter ballot images or misuse them. Because in ARS 16, that governs most of our other election functions, most violations of those functions are stipulated as a Class 5 felony.
Oh, well, I would like to add, anyone
Okay,
who's
let's go through the
Chairwoman,
chair. Thank you.
I'm
if
sorry,
we
ma'am.
could add, anyone who is contracted with the state to oversee if an audit does happen again.
Madam Chair, Representative would be happy to add that.
Thank you. Any other questions for the speaker? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator Bennett, thank you so much. I do have one question on the actual bill itself. On page 1, section A, number 4, it talks about a person shall not use for commercial purposes a voter list that is published or posted pursuant to the section. How is this portion going to be enforced if someone is doing so?
Well, I might steal a little bit of thunder from the secretary, but there are some things that we can and should do at the Secretary of State level and or the county recorder's levels so that when these lists are made available, there's some ways to tell who's abusing the list, for lack of a... And I'll just leave it at that because I don't think we want to stipulate in statute everything that we're doing to protect voters and protect these lists and find out who abuses them. But I know in conversations with the Secretary and others that there's ways to do that, and we ought to make every effort to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions for the bill sponsor? Senator, before we let you go, there is an amendment on this bill. I believe it just does some technical corrections, and that it also it updates the definition to cast vote record, and then also does a few minor technical things. Did you want to say anything about that before
Yes,
we let
Madam
you go?
Chair, thank you very much. I believe the amendment is essentially to make the bill identical to the bill that we're running in the Senate. So there's probably going to be an amendment to 1324 in the Senate, and those two amendments together will make 2560 and 1324 identical. But members, especially my Democrat friends on this side of the dais, this is not what I hope you would consider supporting today in its final form. What I ask humbly of each of you is to support moving this to the next level so that we can work on all of these questions that are coming up and many others. I've got senators on the other side of the aisle in the Senate that I'm working with who have some very good ideas about how to stipulate in statute the publishing of these lists at either the county recorder's level or the Secretary of State's, and instead maybe make it you get the list by applying for the list, and there's no money involved, but at least you have filled out your name and address and email, and you've signed an attestation that you're not going to abuse it, and a few things like that. So there may be some very valid improvements that we want to consider throughout the process. My goal is to get 25 out of 30 votes in the Senate and 50 out of 60 here in the House, and have that broadly bipartisan. And then I think we can get it signed by the governor.
And thank you, Senator. Is there anyone else before we go to the room who has any questions for the senator on the bill or the amendment? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Vice
Thank you,
Chair.
Madam Chair and members.
Thank you, Mr. Senator Bennett. Mr. Vice Chair, will you please call the first speaker?
First speaker for the Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Adrian Fontes. I'm the Arizona Secretary of State. And I want to start with a very clear moment in time. And that is January of 2017. And I want us all to go back very momentarily to what it was we all thought about elections in 2017, January, and what we all thought about ballot images in January of 2017. That's when I first wanted ballot images published. And I want to make very, very clear here that there are points of policy that may have existed far before recent controversies have so divided folks when it comes to the mechanical and practical administration of elections. This is one of those moments. The issue is incredibly important to me, and it's, I think, far greater than we're going to be able to discuss here in the limited amount of time that, Madam Chair, you've granted. And I hope to engage in a comprehensive conversation with all of you about the concerns that you have, about the concerns of your constituencies, because I think that there's a lot of important stuff that needs to be covered. We've already, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, we've already had conversations about some stuff, and I hope that those conversations leave you in a place to know that I come in good faith, and obviously my conversations in relationship with the Senator, former Secretary Bennett, should bolster that. Before I move forward with the particular points, the address confidentiality program in Arizona currently contains 2,446 names. I know that question was asked. I don't know who asked that question. I'm sorry. Yes, Representative Harris. Representative Tarek, there are not just Braille ballots or large form ballots. We have some ballots that are delivered orally for some of our non-sighted voters. We have some of those that are delivered orally in a variety of languages. We have some that are some ballots use ballot marking devices. For example, if a voter does not have use of their hands or arms, they can use the same types of sip and puff technology that we see some folks operating mobility devices in. We also have some forms of ballot that come from our Uniform Overseas Civilian American Voter Act, the UOCAVA voters who are perhaps stationed with the State Department overseas, and so a variety of different forms of ballot come to the county. So we certainly want to consider all of those very specific forms as we move forward with this bill. I wanted to clarify some of those points before I move to some of the reasons why I support this. Now, so long as this bill does, I think some of the things that I've discussed, I'll run through these quickly, and it does do this. It does protect the identity of voters, particularly voters who are law enforcement, judges, participants in the address confidentiality program, and so forth. That is explicitly listed in this bill. I think one of the particular items here is the actual manipulation of the ballots by someone who is not a certified election officer. That is a clear violation of federal law, and I think we have to pay close attention to the overlap of federal law and state law here, and so we need to be very careful about how the ballots are handled, the physical ballots are handled, because I think there's a small portion in here that contemplates that, and who is not only eligible on those even-numbered years November ballots. Now, that doesn't speak to school district ballots, maybe in a May election or a March election for municipal offices, but these are particulars that we have to pay attention to. Additionally, and the Secretary, you weren't stealing any of my thunder, but for the protection of voters and to allow law enforcement to have better investigative tools to find out whether or not these lists have been moved into the commercial space. There are some techniques that I'll be happy to discuss. Eventually they may need to be moved into statutory language, but for security purposes and to not publicly at this stage reveal any law enforcement investigative techniques, I'll reserve any further commentary for those, but those have been contemplated. The other thing I want to make sure that there's three other particular points. I support this bill, number one, because it allows specifically for the county recorders to implement these. Now, granted, we've got to make sure that they've got the resources necessary to do this work. And so I will, as an aside, implore this committee and every other committee that all of you sit on, particularly appropriations, to make sure that the counties have the money that they need to actually do the things that we're demanding of them, including properly staffing the departments that have shown that a lack of staffing can lead to real problems. We only have to look back towards the last election in Pinal County to see that that's real. These provisions, mostly, except for staffing, can be executed at not too much cost for most counties, although some of the county systems need to have some adjustments made to them. We can certainly provide more information on a county-by-county basis to the committee or to this House of the legislature as needed. And There's one other aside that I want to mention that I learned back in January of 2017, right after I first got elected to be Maricopa County Recorder. And it goes back to the first point that I made. I was at a conference for local election, state and local election officials. I can't remember exactly where. And I was sitting after hours enjoying an adult beverage with a person who had worked as an election administrator in 3 different states and then eventually for the United Nations observing elections proceedings across the globe. And he indicated to me that there was one place in the world where 98% of the voters had very high confidence in the outcome of their elections. One place at the time that he spoke to. And I said, that's amazing. Where is it and why? He said, well, this place actually publishes their ballots online by precinct so that the population can go count it their doggone selves. I don't know if that was the exact language, but I know this is a committee, so I'll be proper. And that place is Mongolia. We're not the only jurisdiction that's contemplating this or that is doing this. There are several other jurisdictions, both statewide and otherwise across the United States of America, that are publishing their ballot images, and they don't have any real issues. And I will not diminish concerns by saying that the hand-wringing about this is much ado about nothing. But I will say is this. I'm very, very proud to be standing here with former Secretary Bennett, who is part of that small family of folks who've actually administered elections in their lifetime. I consider him not just a colleague in this endeavor, but a subject matter expert. I hope, like heck, Madam Chair and all of the members here, you will advance this into a greater conversation, a more substantive conversation, so that we can actually get something done here that I truly believe, or I wouldn't be standing here before you talking about it, will increase not only our voters' confidence in our system, but that public verifiability that so many people are looking for across the political spectrum. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Any questions? Any questions for the speaker? Okay, seeing none. Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, you mentioned 2017, and I want to take us back to 2017, which is when this House passed a bill that effectively banned digital images of ballots from being produced, and it passed that bill unanimously. And so I suppose I want you to explain to this committee why this House should reverse itself and what has changed between 2017, where every single member from both parties, every single county in the state decided that this was, I suppose, a bad idea, to today when this should be a good idea.
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you very much for that question. It's a great question, and that's because just prior to that, in 2016, Pima County won a lawsuit against some folks who wanted ballot images published, and that was an insurance policy so that no other counties with that capacity would be subject to the same type of a lawsuit if they tried to go ahead and publish ballot images. With all due respect to the current members and even those past members, I don't know that that was a well-advised bill. But the rationale has absolutely nothing to do with ballot images. It has to do with protecting the state from further lawsuits and further expenses thereunder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Additional follow-up?
Nope.
Okay. Any other?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for the speaker? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got to run. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming today.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, will you please call the next speaker?
First speaker against, Peggy Glenn. Oh. Ms. Marson, are you in against today? Oh, my apologies. This software is terrible.
Madam Chair, members, for the record, Jen Marson with the Association of Counties. I got to get myself elected so I get more than 2 minutes. That's what I've learned today. Listen, we've been working on this issue for a long time now because this was a bill last year, and the bill is dramatically, it's starting where it ended last year, which we're very grateful for because we've been working with Mr. Bennett and most of, if not all of our concerns have been addressed up till this point. From a logistics standpoint, I think we can probably get there, and we're continuing to work with Mr. Toma and Bennett moving forward to make sure that those bills mirror each other. From a logistics standpoint, some of the issues have been sort of hinted at, and I want to run through them. We want to make sure there's some sort of account creation at the SOS office so that they do have that record of the person who is wanting to download that data. In terms of voter privacy, we do need to talk about maybe raising the limit from 10, and I can go into why if someone wants to ask me a question. I do want to talk about precinct parts and why we do believe it is possible to identify voters in some circumstances, and one voter's secrecy being exposed is too many from our perspective. In addition, we do have issues with adding the step of requiring the posting of the original ballot pre-duplication. And while we have talked about UOCAVA or Braille large format in sort of one circumstance, the other circumstance that applies to those ballots is those ballots are not scanned currently. And so maybe we need some language like it doesn't include the images of original duplicates if that image doesn't exist. The other thing, if we're going to try and protect everyone, maybe there's language about if you could identify that one person in that small precinct part, maybe we're able to not post that image and offer an explanation as to why. So there is no way for that voter to be identified under any circumstance. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the speaker? Okay, let's go ahead. We'll do Tarek, and then we'll do Culloden, and then Hernandez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ms. Marson. Can we let's talk about the small bundles of voters. You mentioned 10, and this is a conversation I've had many times. What is a floor that you at the counties, and I don't know if you're able to put a specific number on it, would feel comfortable with in terms of how big those data bundles are?
So, Madam Chair and Representative Tarek, I want to give a little background if that's okay. So what we're talking about here is, let's say you have a precinct, this nice little box is a precinct, and there's only 10 voters in it, right? Right now, the bill contemplates 10. But let's say, especially in a primary, right? In a primary, you have precinct parts, and so the voters who live here have a different school district than the voters that live here, or fire district, or candidates, or whatever it is, right? A precinct part. In a primary with low turnout and a small precinct and precinct parts, let's say there's only one Republican who lives in this precinct part. Well, now we can pretty easily identify if that Republican voted in that election because based on their precinct part, which is identified on the ballot. That is our overarching concern. Now, Colorado, for example, I think their threshold is 20 because they do something like this. And when my folks have reached out to their counterparts, they've said, you know, originally we thought a really small floor was the right way to go. But actually, we think it should be a little bit bigger because then it's harder and you have more chances that more voters with a similar styled ballot would be in the precinct and inside the precinct part. I don't know what the magic number is, but I think in talking to some of the other states that do this, 10 is probably too low. The other thing I would like to mention regarding the precincts is I think the bill says you're going to blend the small precincts with 10 or fewer with a large precinct. What if adjacent, right? The word adjacent is used. What if they're not adjacent to a large, they're only adjacent to another small? So I think we need to think through making sure that the blending, do you require that the blending happen with a big? I don't know exactly, but I think we need to allow for those possibilities because in rural Arizona, we do have a lot of small precincts that are adjacent to each other, and that I don't think will solve that overarching privacy problem just with the language as it exists now. But I totally agree with, I just almost called you Speaker Bennett, sorry, Senator Bennett, that this is still a work in progress, and we are happy to be at the table, and we are appreciative of the sponsors in both chambers working with us.
I believe next was Representative Culloden, and then Hernandez.
Ms. Marson, we had talked about the issue of the small precincts a few days ago, and I had spitballed an idea that you had said you were going to check in with your members about. My understanding is that what could potentially cause a concern with these small precincts is the very small races and split precincts. So, for example, a fire district race or whatever. And I had floated the idea of a solution to that being to redact the small races on the ballot, the ones that were not statewide, presidential, legislative, county, but fire district race or whatever. Redact those races for the small precincts. Did you have a chance to check in with your membership and see if that might be a potentially workable solution?
So, Madam Chair, Representative Calden, I don't have feedback on that issue as pertains to your specific question. I can only answer it as we've discussed before when the word redact comes up. That is a loaded word, if you will, because it requires a specific thing that has to happen on a technology basis in order to remove that information. And I don't know, and I'm working to find out the intricacies of redacting races as opposed to not posting ballots that would fit that description of a precinct part sort of situation. But also keep in mind, the ballot is coded usually at the top of the first front page, especially, to designate that precinct part or that split for that precinct. So if the lesser races are lower on the ballot, that is not going to alleviate the concern of being able to identify, in the example I gave with this precinct part, because even if you take the races off, you still will be able to know whose ballot it was, even if you didn't know how they voted on the small races.
Madam Chair, Ms. Morrison, that coding is separate from the selections themselves?
Madam Chair, Representative Calden, that's correct. So if you think about, like especially in a primary, you might have a ballot with a different colored stripe at the top of it to designate that you are this type of ballot style versus other people in the area in your still precinct are that type of ballot style. So there are different ways to identify that ballot. And so, for example, let's say the precinct is precinct 100. You may have a 100.1 to designate the precinct part for that precinct, or 100.2 subsequent.
Madam Chair, a follow on that, Ms. Morrison. So then, if the redaction solution were to be workable, that would, for those small precincts, you could also redact that information without impairing the ability of anybody to use the ballot for counting.
Madam Chair, Representative Calden, I believe that's correct. We would want to make sure we're not redacting timing marks or all that kind of stuff. But if we're going to go down the road of redaction, that might be a cleaner version than races.
Madam Chair, one more question for Ms. Morrison. You talk about the concerns about posting the ballot pre-adjudication in terms of not already taking these images. Is this something? Is this a problem, as Secretary Fontes has indicated, that the ability to have more staff and more manpower would resolve?
Madam Chair, Representative Calden, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. I referenced duplication, not adjudication, which are different things.
After 10 years in election law, I still get those two things confused.
Okay, so what I was talking about was there are certain ballots that are not scanned into the system. They are duplicated. They are duplicated, and then that duplication is scanned, but the original ballot isn't. So we just want some clarifying language to make sure we don't have to scan the Braille. We don't have to scan the large format. We don't have to scan the UOCAVA. We're going to scan that. That would be part of the images that would be posted.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And then Representative. Okay. Any other questions for this speaker?
I do. Madam Chair, Ms. Martian, if the purpose of this legislation is to allow any citizen to be able to verify the vote themselves and access this data, I'm curious why your concern is that you want to have a login system where people have to create an account, identify who they are, give their information before they download the information on the ballots.
So, Madam Chair and Representative Heap, so sort of what we're getting at is going to be on page 2, the new paragraph C, which talks about if the person were to misuse the list or change the images so that they could make some kind of claim that the county did something wrong, there's penalties associated with that. We would like, and maybe the security things that the Secretary alluded to but didn't want to go into detail, maybe that would satisfy our concern. Our initial suggestion was some sort of account creation might solve that problem, but if they have a different way to solve it that's better, we're certainly open to that.
Okay. Madam Chair, Ms. Marsden, but we are talking about digital data here. So once, let's say I create an account and I download the data, Now that I have it, it can be shared with anybody. I have the data as it is. So how would me creating an account control the flow of that data?
So Madam Chair, Representative Heap, so, and this is a little bit beyond my full knowledge, but metadata is real, right? We can track when documents were changed and whatnot. So let's say I download, let's call it a PDF file of all the ballot images from Yavapai County, for example. And I can go in and alter that PDF pretty easily to change notations, maybe change a write-in name, change the way an oval or a bubble is filled in, and then use my altered image to say, this is what I got from the county, and clearly this data doesn't match with the CVR record, something must be afoot. Paragraph C is in there so that there is a way to penalize people who would do such a thing, and our initial thought was the login would have a metadata trace to that specific file, so we would be able to know who we needed to have a conversation with.
But Madam Chair, Ms. Barson, if I download the data, and let's say I then share that data with all the PCs in my district, after that point, there'd be no way that you'd be able to tell who edited or who changed the document after that point. In fact, I would add, you'd probably come back to me expecting me to explain it, and I would say I didn't have anything to do with altering it.
Madam Chair, Representative Heap, if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be corrected, but it's my understanding that metadata travels with the document. And so even if you forwarded a clean copy to a PC and a PC subsequently changed it, we would be able to see where that PC got it from. Does that mean we would want to penalize you? No, not necessarily. But now we know how they got it through your login, through the data that you received through your account creation.
Any other questions for the speaker? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Vice Chair, please call up the next person.
For the next speaker, back to my notes. Bill Risner.
Yes, thank you. My name's Bill Risner. I'm a lawyer from Tucson. I've been a lawyer for 55 years. I'm in the process of retiring. I first had a political case where I represented the Democratic Party in a redistricting case in 1970. I've been hired by our Board of Supervisors a couple times for election advice. In the Arizona Constitution, Article 7, Number 7, is clear as the major thing setting us up for a democratic government here says that the person with the highest number of votes is declared elected. So people need to know how and verify that information. The system that's used in Maricopa County is terrific. The abilities, the Dominion contract is set up so that these things can be put on the line. The ballots, the votes are counted from images by ballots. That's the Dominion system. That's the ES&S system. That's where the technology is nationwide. There was a question before about when the ninjas were doing their analysis of the ballots. The Arizona Senate subpoenaed from the county election department, from the county board of supervisors, the images from that election. They turned those over to the Senate. Later, the ninja group says, we looked at the ballots and we're not sure about a couple of these things if it was in. What the county did at the same time they turned it over, they created a clone of it, and they went back and everything that they were looking for was there. The technology is it's phenomenal. You have now that if you would look at the Dominion contract, if you look at what the county itself put out in its report to the public, the 90
Mr. Risner,
pages.
that is time, unfortunately. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I'm so sorry to cut you off.
Thank
I
you.
think we might have questions from the committee.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Any questions from the committee?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
Mr. Risner, do I take it correctly from the idea or the fact that you had mentioned that you'd represented the Pima County Democratic Party, that you yourself are a Democrat?
Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Risner, if you mind saying in open committee, you certainly don't need to, but if I could ask, who did you vote for governor this past election cycle?
I was pleased to see that my selection matched a lot of other people.
Fair. Fair enough, Mr. Risner. No, Madam Chair. Sorry. Fair enough, Mr. Risner, Madam Chair. Mr. Risner, when did you first become a proponent of the idea of creating a system like the one that we are trying to put in place today?
I proposed a resolution for the State Democratic Party at convention that was unanimously passed in 2010. If you understand how this system works and you want to have it, you verify that the count of votes is accurate, this is the system that's set up, this is how you do it, this is how everybody can see it. If you don't want to show, you don't want a 44 lawsuits, you don't want everything that's going on, where people can look and see, here were the ballots, here's the votes. The system's here, it's paid for by the public. It's a question of using it and letting the public in on it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker? Thank you very much, Mr. Risner. I appreciate it. Mr. Vice Chair, will you please call the next speaker?
Madam Chair. We hit Jen. Let me just get to the bottom of this list. Madam Chair, I see Francesca Padres as against. Ms. Padres here? Not seeing Ms. Padres. The next speaker against is...
I see Elizabeth Putnam Hidalgo, but she wasn't here earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to
we have no speakers against that are... there might be one if necessary. Is there an if necessary? Okay, not seeing any, we'll move to the next speaker for. That will be Mickey Duniho.
Hello, I'm Mickey Duniho. I'm from Pima County, and I'm an independent, in case you're interested. I'm representing an organization called AUDIT USA, which is supporting this bill, and I'm here to suggest that it's a good bill. I'm also working with some other people nationwide on a new way of auditing elections using ballot images, and we will hopefully be introducing that bill in the next week or two. That bill will depend on somebody saying clearly in the law that ballot images are in fact a public record and are available to the public. So that's my chief interest in this particular bill, is to make sure that we wind up saying that ballot images are public records. I have heard, also I wanted to mention that we're hoping that these two bills, this bill and the ballot image audit bill, will become models for other states. And our interest as an organization is to create a model in Arizona that can be applied in other state legislatures. So we're hoping that once we get this stuff passed here, we'll move on to other states. There have been some concerns about the burden placed on the recorder's offices and on the election departments, and I certainly encourage you to make sure that they have the resources to do that. Another objection has been on exposing voters' intent. I would point out that
if you could just finish briefly your sentence. Thank you so much.
In the existing canvas of elections, which is published on the Secretary of State's website, I can go in there and find somebody who submitted a provisional ballot in a small precinct where they're the only provisional ballot, and I can go down the list and I can tell you how that person voted on every race on the ballot, and I can go into the signature register and I can identify the voter, and that's the existing system. We can already identify how some voters voted. So certainly I encourage you to pay attention to this, but it's already a problem, and I don't think we can fix the canvas.
Madam Chair, Mr. Duniho, you mean to tell me that under the items that are already currently publicly available, you could take those and you could already identify without this law how a voter voted?
I looked at the Pima County canvas last night. In Precinct 7, one person cast a provisional ballot. That one person voted for Blake Masters, Luis Pozzolo, Carrie Lake, Jim Cleveland, Damian Kennedy, Mark Fincham, Abraham Hamida, Kimberly Yee, Tom Horn. And I'm sure that I can go to the signature register and find out the name of the person who cast that ballot. And putting those two pieces of information together, I could then identify the person and his votes. That's already a problem, but it involves somebody doing a lot of research and going to a lot of trouble to identify a voter and how the voter voted. And the problem with data is that you put enough data together, you can come up with some really interesting conclusions.
Mr. Duniho, Madam Chair, Mr. Duniho. So then do I mean to infer from your comment that this bill does not provide any additional means of identifying a voter or their selections separate from what is already in existing law?
I think that's correct.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any other questions for the speaker? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, please call the next person.
The next speaker for Madam Chair, Mike Fogel.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Mike Fogel. I am the chair of the Yavapai County Democrats, and I just recently ran for the Arizona Senate, LD1. First of all, I want to relieve everybody in your shock to understand that there is a Democrat associated with LD1. And that the 10 or 11 of us are a formidable force. All you have to do is ask my opponent, Ken Bennett, who creamed me. I'm not here as an expert witness. I don't have the PhDs that are from people you've already heard of. I haven't been elected to office at the highest levels of people you have already listened to. So I can't offer much more in that regard. However, I'm a rather simple guy, and I understand transparency. I understand tractability. I understand public verifiability. I am confident that this bill, which I endorse, and I hope that you all move forward, is going to help the state and then potentially, as was just suggested, the country, to improve and to increase the trust in the public, in our election process, and that we are strengthening by endorsing this and moving this forward and getting it passed our democratic institutions, the most sacred of which is the vote and our elections. So, in the spirit of that, I think that this is a nonpartisan issue, and it is an American issue, and one in which, if we do not do something like this, it will only the falling into that rabbit hole, that is very dark place, will only get further. So I'm, again, endorsing this bill.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions for the speaker?
Mr. Fogel?
Yes.
Madam Chair. I've been thinking about this all day. Do you find it somewhat ironic that a piece of legislation that's been part of your party's platform for so long is now being advanced by a Republican?
Ironic? Well, let me say this. I happen to think, in the course of running against Ken Bennett, that I came to understand a reasonable, principled Republican, opposite of me, that has integrity. And we have become good friends. We disagree on a lot of issues and how to do things. But if I can vouch for his character, I would do that right now. And a good idea is a good idea. I don't care if it comes from a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or whatever. And I think that this is an excellent idea. And it will remedy a lot of social problems that we currently have in our country.
Madam Chair, Mr. Fogel, I didn't mean ironic in a pejorative way. The way that I was thinking about it is sometimes as parties, as political parties, we forget that we're machines for generating ideas and advancing them. And the irony that I found in it, and you could tell me if you share it, was that this idea was so good, right, that everybody forgot what party it came from. And I just thought that was a little strange. So.
I understand.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fogel.
Thank you. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
Madam
Oh,
Chair.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Representative Harrison.
What was your name again?
Mike Fogel.
Mr. Fogel. Okay. So, do you know if you called the Yavapai County Recorder right now and you asked for a cast vote record or CVR, do you know if it would be available?
I'm confident that it would be.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, Mr. Fogel, I'm pretty sure it was Yavapai, and if not Yavapai, but there are counties, because there was a call for everyone to ask for the recorder's CVR throughout the state, throughout the country. And of the 15 counties in Arizona, several recorders reported back to us that the CVRs were not available because there was a switch that was not turned on in the machine. So I would just hope that you and every other county could go back to the recorders and make sure they know where that switch is. Thank you.
Yes, if it's as simple as a switch, we'll do it.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for the speaker? All right, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair, please call the next speaker.
Now for our fifth and final speaker although we had many more, as this is a hard list for, I'm sure, John Brakey to prioritize. We do have Aaron Flannery of the Maricopa County Recorder's Office.
All right, good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members. My name is Aaron Flannery. I work with the Maricopa County Recorder's Office, and that's who I'm representing today. We've been counting ballots, for decades, and technology has advanced in many ways, not just over the last, 2 or 3 years, but over the last 2 or 3 decades. So the way that we vote and the way that we count has changed as well. When we have these new systems, transparency doesn't go away, but it gets a little harder to see. Point is that to create an election system, there's a lot of sausage to be made, and that's an important point to understand, because you're trying to explain election procedures to the average voter, and their eyes glaze over. So what we want to do is emphasize that we support this, because this type of system will make it clear for voters on, who voted, how many people voted, who actually was the winner of an election, not who voted for who. That is very important, and we've been working and appreciate working with not just Senator Bennett, but also Representative Toma on making sure this bill does pass muster. It does protect voters and who they voted for, and then also provides that needed transparency that builds voter confidence. So Maricopa County is very, very proud to say we are supporting this bill, and I will be able to answer any questions for you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the speaker?
I have one. Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I've already forgotten your name. Can you repeat it for me?
Aaron Flannery.
Aaron Flannery. Mr. Flannery, Madam Chair, can you just give us any guidance on the time frame that it will take to scan these ballots and make them available?
Madam Chair and Representative, I believe that process is pretty instantaneous because as the ballots are going through the machine being counted, it is taking an image as well. So I believe the bill gives us 48 hours. I believe we can do it within that time parameter easily.
Oh, thank you. Madam Chair, Representative Heap, this bill does not ask the counties to do anything additionally to scan these images other than Ms. Marston's comment about whether we want to require them to scan ballots that were kind of hand-handled or came in online. But the images are already there. All they got to do is put them in a file and make them available. So we're not asking them to do any more scanning. That already happens as just a normal part of the election.
And to that point, Madam Chair, Mr. Flannery, let's say that you were to now be required to also scan duplicated ballots. Can you estimate how long that would take, both with your current manpower and if you had some increased muscle?
Madam Chair and Representative Cullinan, I don't actually have that number, but we do share the same concerns, and we voice those with the small tweaks. UOCAVA, Braille, large print. You know, those ballots we don't initially scan, especially the UOCAVA when they have personal identifying information on them a lot of times. But when we do duplicate a ballot, it is run through a machine so that a bipartisan board can view it on the screen and make any duplications necessary. So those should already also be scanned in through the process.
Thank you.
Excellent. Did you have any follow-up?
Nope.
You're good. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Chairwoman, I have a question. Mr. Flannery?
Yes.
Yeah, Flannery. I kind of share some similar thoughts with Representative Heap about the metadata that we kind of got some information about. Would you be willing to give us a tour on how that kind of plays out at the county level of PDFs being downloaded and shared, and how we can make sure it is tracked?
Madam Chair and Representative De Los Santos, if I'm understanding you right. Oh, I'm sorry, Aguilar. My apologies. If I'm understanding you right, you're looking for a physical tour to come down and watch this process, and we'd be more than happy to do that. It's actually something we've done in the past. In fact, a few representatives last year, Representative Schwiebert came down, Senator Rogers came down, walked through. We'll take you through the entire process and let you view all the processes so that you're clear on what's going on. We invite everyone to do that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions for the speaker? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Vice Chair, will you please move the bill?
Madam Chair, if I could get that handy dandy script with the amendment. I always get that part wrong. Thank you. Madam Chair, I move that HB 2560 be returned with a due pass recommendation.
Okay, and then Mr. Vice Chair, will you please move the amendment as well?
Madam Chair, I move that the Parker Amendment dated 2/7/2023 at 8:42 a.m. Be the one-page Parker be adopted.
Okay, so members, the motion before you is the adoption of the Parker Amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. It appears the ayes have it, do have it so ordered. Mr. Vice Chairman, please move the bill as amended.
Madam Chair, I move that HB 2560 be adopted as amended.
Members, the motion before you is the HB 2560 as amended be returned with a due pass recommendation. Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Aguilar,
If I could explain my vote, Chairwoman.
Yep.
So the fact that Senator Ken Bennett came up to us and spoke to us about this bill and was very transparent, I do believe you were very genuine, and I appreciate you coming to speak to us. But I do have a lot of concerns and issues with this bill today. I don't want to see another cyber ninja audit take place in this state, and I want to make sure that we get this right the next time we do it. But I also do not want to see the state lead into conspiracy crazy state that we keep hearing about at the national level. And if this committee can sit together and we can have all stakeholders, maybe we can get somewhere. I have some same concerns, like I said, that Representative Heap has and brought up about metadata, and if there's a way that we can track that information, I would feel a lot comfortable with that. I don't want people misusing our information. I recently sat down with the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and I know one of his concerns was talking about how public U.S. Citizens' information is and how scary it can be for other countries to build profiles on us, and that's with selling homes or buying homes and having that information with voting, social media. And so that is a little concerning. Today I'm going to vote no, but if we can keep this conversation going and invite us and have some genuine conversations, I would love to be part of that.
Representative De Los Santos.
Nay.
Representative Harris.
Aye.
Representative Heap.
Explain my vote. I think of all the bills we've heard so far on elections, this one is my favorite. If I'm going to wear out the old saw of saying our intention here is to kind of restore some confidence in our elections, this is the best step towards doing that, because what it allows is for any citizen who wants to audit the thing, anyone who has a concern that it wasn't counted correctly, can download the data and count it for themselves and make sure. And that's good. That's transparent both for the people and it also is good for government to have this oversight of the people. If it was the case that there was an election official who wanted to influence or change the election, this would be a strong deterrent for them to try to do that, because this data will be made available. So for that reason, I vote aye.
Representative Hernandez.
Pass.
Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Smith.
Madam Chair, may I explain my vote?
Yep.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members, transparency is a good thing. Our voters have been asking for more transparency for a very long time. And so let's just be absolutely clear about this bill, that it protects the personal identifying information of voters. And that's the intent of this bill from what Senator Bennett was saying. Election integrity, guys, should not be a partisan issue. This is a Republican-led bill that a Democrat Secretary of State just testified in favor for. And Mr. Bennett and Secretary Fontes are probably on very opposite ends of the political spectrum. Am I right, Mr. Bennett? And I look forward to voting for this bill today and on the floor. With that, I vote aye.
Representative Terrick.
Madam Chair, may I? Transparency and the protected right to privacy are both paramount principles that should be embodied in our laws. This is a new frontier, and I believe that robust discussion and understanding must be achieved to ensure that in the course of transparency, we do not unduly sacrifice citizens' right to privacy. This may be a tool for encouraging faith in our elections, but it will not solve the root cause. As our state's leaders, we must wholeheartedly commit to defeating election misinformation by calling it out, by defending the procedures that do and have successfully worked, and by defending the election workers of all political stripes who have administered our elections successfully. I want more people weighing in on this issue. I referenced that I wish we'd slowed this bill down a bit. What we are contemplating here is a major, major change, and I have grave concerns about the privacy aspects of this bill. I'm concerned that what we gain in transparency, we lose on the back end with voter confidence in the idea of their right to a secret ballot. I want to thank Senator Bennett and Representative Culloden for the conversations that we've had about this bill. I appreciate the way that you've brought the minority party into the process to approach this in a truly bipartisan way, and our dialogue will continue. The question before us is the bill in its current form. I'm committed to continuing these conversations, but in its current form today, I am a no.
Representative Hernandez.
Madam Chair, may I? Strengthening our democracy takes time, and this bill is simply not ready. I have always hated when someone says that not voting yes for a bill in committee stops it from seeing the light of day moving forward. The reality is that a bill can always be reconsidered in following committees. It can be run as a striker. We can suspend the rules that we've seen some of our colleagues do on floor, and it can be brought back to life in so many ways. And I would love to, this bill does not have the bipartisan support it needs to be successful on the floor. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because you need to work with us. You need us more than we need you on this bill. And we need really strong amendments on this bill to make this successful and to bring Governor Hobbs as a yes to this table. And right now, I can say with confidence that it is not in a form that she, I don't think, can support. And like I said, this bill is not ready. It's a good idea, but if this bill is to prevail as good election policy, and we are not seeing that today, you reach out. And I'm happy to reach out to you to set up a meeting. I really love that Secretary Fontes, that Speaker Toma, now Senator Bennett I have run back and forth between Secretary Fontes, George Diaz, Speaker Toma's office. I'm probably annoying him so much, but I am so thankful for the very wonderful conversations we've had about finding bipartisan solutions. Me voting no does not mean I don't support this idea. It just means I don't support the election or the election policy currently in front of me, but it doesn't mean that won't change in the future. I look forward to the continued conversations. I vote no.
Vice Chairman Culloden.
Madam Chair, I first want to start off today by recognizing a guy who bumped himself off his own speaker list so that others could speak, John Brakey, who was my very first client in my very first election case that I ever had, with a bipartisan group of people that were concerned about the Santa Cruz County elections. Now, John is and has always been a Democrat, and we have vociferous debates about virtually everything besides elections. But on elections, we agree. And in this bill, it's not a Republican idea. This was John's idea, and he's been talking about it for 10 years. So I want to recognize him. I also want to thank Secretary Fontes for coming to speak to us today. Him and I have been, I don't want to say enemies, but in the past we've certainly been opponents. I have sued him. In fact, I took him to the Supreme Court and won once. But it takes a certain kind of man to see past that kind of animosity and come together over a good idea. And I'm grateful that he was the kind of man who would do that. So I want to recognize him and thank him for working with us on this bill. And of course, Secretary Bennett, who's the most knowledgeable person about elections I know, who worked so hard on the bill. Obviously, we all know each other a little bit better than we know each other on the left and right side of this dais. But that'll change. That'll change with time. That'll change with time. And when we know each other as well as John and I know each other, maybe a little bit sooner than that, hopefully, I think that, like everybody else who's looked at this issue on both the left and the right, that you too will realize that this is what this country needs. Because distrust in our elections is not a partisan endeavor. Back in 2014, it was actually rather considered to be the left who had distrust of our elections, and with good reason. I think that it's good to be skeptical of the government and good to be skeptical of government processes, and it's good whether you're left or it's good whether you're right. But although distrust in our elections is not a partisan endeavor, it is clear that transparency is the cure. Our voting system is so complicated. No normal person can understand it. They can't see it. They can't feel it. They can't touch it. And so, like normal people do, they can't trust it because the trust is not comprehensible to them. When we get this bill right, when we get into the final form, ordinary people will be able to do that for the first time in this country. And it will heal the divides that we have. It'll heal the rift between brother and brother. It won't fix everything. It won't make our elections perfect, but it might make us a better people. And with that, I do vote aye.
Chairman Parker?
Aye. Okay, members, by your vote of 6 ayes, 4 nays, 0 absent, you have given HB 2560 as amended a due pass recommendation. Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, our next